All right, welcome to the Alex Speiser Show. I'm here with Provo Mayor John Curtis, and I wanted to interview him and ask him about some of his experiences as a mayor. You know, you have a lot of experience on the local level. You get to know the people very well. But also, he's running to replace Representative Jason Chaffetz, who is retiring early in his term. I speak with a lot of people who say they feel like Congress, you know, basically all the federal government is very disconnected with the people. Utah tends to have very good representatives at the federal level. However, I feel like people are becoming more skeptical of that for Utah because you have someone like Jason he was a very enthusiastic guy, goes in there, and then now he says, in his own words, he said he's become cynical because he doesn't feel like anything can happen. So how do you feel like you would be able to drive change to make things happen where Jason felt like he could not?
So that's a great question, and I actually asked myself that question before I decided to run. And the answer I came up with is they told me the same thing about being mayor. They told me you couldn't really make a difference. And they told me that people wouldn't care about what you were doing. And we found some formulas that I think counter that accusation, and I'm excited to take those to Washington. The level of complexity, I get it, is greater, but I think the principles still apply.
And when you say you found some formulas, what do you mean by formulas?
Well, the biggest thing is most politicians were forced to keep a wall up, and it's because people are so intrusive. They want to know everything in our lives, and every mistake is magnified, and so politicians tend to put this wall up. And I've found by taking the wall down, the exact opposite happens, that they give you a pass, a little bit of a pass, not completely, but a little, oh, he's human. Of course he makes mistakes. And instead of me pretending like I never make mistakes, I'm the first to say, you know what, I'm just like you. And taking that wall down, I think, has been a really good thing here in Provo. And people feel like I'm approachable and accessible, that I'll answer their emails. And I think that's a key component for somebody who's successful in this type of role.
I personally, for my audience and myself, we are very concerned with how things affect a community, like positively and negatively. What is probably the number one thing that you saw that negatively affects a community?
So if we're not careful, we default to the worst case. We assume the worst of somebody. If somebody's looking for my faults, they'll find them, right? I mean, they just will. And unfortunately, in politics, we tend to spend too much time on the negative and looking for the faults. And I think particularly in local government, you look at mayors and city councils around the state, they're just good people. They've taken out a chunk of their lives, most of them with almost no compensation. And so I would hope that we would, when we look at those people, understand that they're normal people with imperfections in their life, but they're doing their best, and instead of just looking for what they're doing wrong.
Absolutely. So definitely politics is one of those things that can really mess with the community. And actually that goes in line with last year. You had said, speaking of the whole debates going on with the presidential election, and that was crazy. You said it's as if this national negativity is just filtering down into our city and into our home. So how would you be a force if you were elected to stop that sort of filtering down?
I'm glad you mentioned that article that I wrote, because I was astounded at the community's reaction to that. I received more input on that than anything I have ever posted or written or anything. And it was as if we struck a chord with what everybody was feeling, which is yuck, right? Like we need a shower. And that's why I say, look, we've got to find that which is good and focus on that which is good. And there's plenty of it. It's all over the place. But we're too focused on, and unfortunately, particularly in the case of that presidential election, the leaders were taking us there. They were the ones that you just couldn't turn on the TV without hearing, oh, it's just dirty, yucky stuff, right? And I want the President of the United States to inspire me. It's one of the reasons I love Ronald Reagan. I think he inspired all of us to be our best, and that's one of the most important characteristics, I think, of a leader.
So, if you're elected, what issues are you most passionate about working on in Congress?
To me, it all centers on how we spend money, and that until we figure that out and get that straight, we're just not going to be our best in anything. It impacts everything we do, from national defense to healthcare. The fact that we don't know how to spend money well.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here because some people have problems with money or whatever. They hear, oh, you think that money is such a big important thing. Where do you see America going if there was the flip side, like our economy actually did become better, government stepped out a little more, as you seem to propose?
Well, let me kind of answer that, and then you tell me if I've answered it.
Yeah.
But I believe that the problem centers to begin with this whole concept of the way that the government spends money. And I found here in Provo, they're far more concerned with us delivering a value to them than they are with how much we spend. Now that's not completely true. I mean, obviously they care how much we spend. But first and foremost, if we can show them that we're spending their money well, they're far more supportive. If you think about what a city delivers to its residents, we take in revenue about 20% of property tax. When somebody pays property tax, we get 20-25% of that, and we get a half of a penny for every dollar you spend in a store in Provo. Okay? And in return for that, we give you police, fire, sewer, clean water that comes in, storm drains that go out, parks, recreation, public works, community development, economic. I mean, it's crazy what we deliver for that tiny little bit of revenue. And if we could duplicate that type of value to taxpayers at other levels, and I think we come very close at county and state, but when we get to that federal level, we just break down. We just take massive amounts of money and are not delivering a value back to our residents for that.
And that does answer the question. Thank you. What makes you feel like you are qualified to jump from governing at a local level to governing at a national level? I mean, that's a really big gap to jump, right?
Yeah. So I smile because I actually think I have a tougher job as mayor. But I don't know anybody that does harder things than mayors. Being a mayor means I'm putting a road in somebody's backyard. It means we're doing hard things, right? And we're accountable because people know my cell phone number. They know where I live. We're far more accountable than when you go back to Washington. So I believe I can take what I've learned here in the way we spend money, in the way that we interact with residents, in the way that we make hard decisions. All of those things need to be taken back to Washington. In many respects, what needs to happen to Washington is what's happening here in cities and in our counties and in our state.
So how then do you propose that you can be influencing Washington and not become influenced by Washington? Because many people see they elect a really good guy to get in there and then he flip-flops and becomes infected.
Yeah, I think you articulate my single biggest worry. I like to joke about it a little bit. When I was elected mayor, I came in the next morning and on my desk there was a little cup of Kool-Aid. and it was good, right? And guess what? The next day, the Kool-Aid fairy had brought more in. And there was Kool-Aid on it. And I think as politicians, every day we just drink that tiny little bit of Kool-Aid. One day it doesn't change us, right? But over time it changes us. Ultimately, that's why I didn't run for mayor for a third term. People not always understood that decision because things are going so well. I've got this huge popularity rating. And for me, it was about, I've got to stop before I've had too much Kool-Aid. And I think as you go back to Washington, you just got to be really careful not to drink the Kool-Aid and to associate with other elected officials who see it, but particularly constituents who you trust, who will tell you when you're off track. And I've actually had, with this campaign, I've had very good trusted friends say, you know what, you're off track. And they were right. And it's helped recalibrate me in a really important way.
Well, good. Would you say that having a staff that is also in constant contact with people from the state and having them, obviously advising you on what you do you feel like that's probably one of the bigger ways to keep you from being, I don't want to say infiltrated, but... Yeah,
there's a couple of things. That is huge. The people you surround yourself with have to feel that burden of telling you when you're wrong, when you've had too much Kool-Aid, when you're not seeing things clearly. If you don't surround yourself with people like that, you're doomed. And so I think that's critical. I think it's critical to surround yourself with people who don't necessarily agree with you politically. I've loved that here in the mayor's office. We have people with very diverse opinions, and we challenge each other, and we make each other stronger, if that makes sense, because you've had to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And listen to somebody else's point of view. And then the other component of that is developing systems that keep you in touch with constituents. It's critical that somehow you're reading the emails, that you're hearing the calls, and the magnitude of difficulty is high. I can do that here. We have 118,000 residents. I can get to all their emails and meet with anybody who wants to come in. And somehow I need to have to figure out my own version of that in a larger pool, so that you are talking to them, hearing them, and understanding what they're telling you.
Utah has a lot of federal land.
Yeah.
The end of Obama's term, he added a lot more. I'm from Wyoming, and I grew up right next to Yellowstone. And so for me personally, I've seen very much firsthand what happens when you have federal government control lands and the policies around that. For example, we had a really big problem with wolves, and wolves would come in and destroy a lot of livestock of our own neighbors. And how would you then address the issue of federal government being, owning so much land and controlling all those things that should most likely be at the state level?
Let's go to principles for a minute, and then we'll
Yeah.
apply the principles in this case. The closer governance is to the situation, the better that governance is. We know that, right? That people closer to the problem make better decisions. And nobody knows this better than the mayor, right? We're at the end of the chain. You have federal government, state government, county government, and mayors. And we have big bossy government all the way through the chain. And yet we feel like we make better decisions. We're closer to our constituents than anybody. People know my cell phone number. They see me on the street. They can talk to me. The further that government gets away from the people, the less accountable they are, the less accessible they are. So if you apply that to federal lands, of course in Utah we want to manage our own lands. We want to control our own destiny. We think we're good. We think we can do it better than anybody else. And I think the complaint in Utah now is, well, give us a chance, right? Let us prove to you that we can do this. And I think when we see the federal government taking a unilateral action, what I mean by that is a president who makes a decision with no backside, no confirmation by Congress or nothing like that, but just a unilateral decision, you're going to have people concerned and questioning that decision. And I think that's what's happening. And then unfortunately it's becoming very divisive. And the two sides, instead of getting closer together, seem to be getting further apart. And the reality of it is that we have to work with the federal government. We've got to persuade them to give us more control. We can demand it, I guess, but it would be a lot better to try to persuade them. And so I hope in the future we can, as a state, gain more and more control over our own land, that we can prove to the federal government that we're a good steward over that, better than they are. And that all of their worries are actually better handled by us than by them.
Do you feel like religious freedom is something that can be more fairly represented in Congress? Because it's almost demonized, right? We're told that religious freedom is just an excuse for discrimination, and that came out as one of the federal reports about religion. Do you feel as though there is a way to switch that around? If so, how?
Well, first of all, we must, right? Because it's in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Right? And so we need to figure this out. I'm the first to advocate for no discrimination. And yet there's a cross-section, I think, between making sure we're not discriminating and making sure that we're protecting religious freedom. And that cross-section to me is mutual respect. And I know we can't legislate that. But of all places here in Utah, we should be able to figure that out, that mutual respect. That we respect somebody's rights on both sides of this equation. And if we can find that respect, then a lot of these things melt, right, and don't become so complicated. But I do believe that we can't compromise religious freedoms in our pursuit of finding that happy place where we're not discriminating.
People lose hope in America, so what would you suggest that they have hope in? I mean, is it they should have hope in you, they should have hope in this legislation? Like what should they have hope in?
Oh, I think this is so clear to me. They should have hope in the spirit of America, in people, I just am astounded at the residents of Provo and their goodness and what happens every day in our city outside the government that is good and moves the city forward. And that's what gives me hope, is looking at the lives of people. It's crazy the things that happen in a positive way in our city, day in and day out. But I go to events and I see an Eagle Scout who's done this, and I see a neighbor who has done this, and everything from putting up a small little reading library in a little box in front of their home for kids to have books to read, to people who have done significant things. The rooftop concert series was all done by residents, not the government. And I think if you look throughout Provo, you'll see just a myriad of good that's happening every day, and it's so gratifying to me to see that and know that that's really our secret sauce.
Just to be a little bit of devil's advocate, would you say that's a little Pollyannish to say, oh, to have hope in the dream of America, the spirit of America?
So let's play with that for a minute. Like what's wrong with that, right? I mean, what's wrong with being Pollyannish? What's wrong with believing that it's the people that make this country great? It always has been. And as government, sometimes we think, oh, we're pretty cool. But at the end of the day, you know what? Without our residents, we're nothing. And so I don't think so. I would push back on you and say, fine, let me be accused of that. That's my greatest mistake. Then bring it on, because I do believe that's the heart of who we are. There's this spirit of goodwill and goodness. And I think when people get frustrated, it's because they don't see that in government. That's missing, and that they expect that.
The last question is, how can people learn more about you and your run for Congress to be more informed as a voter?
Thank you. That's a great question. My website, johncurtis.org, has a lot of information, and it also has events. So if people will go there, it's not enough just to read a little bit on the website. You can read about events where you can come and have an opportunity to hear me in person and ask me questions. And there will be, no doubt, a lot more events between now and the election. And I might say a lot of people don't understand this election, so if I could just explain briefly.
Sure.
On August 15th, there is a primary election, and it's a mail-in ballot. So if you're a registered Republican, you'll automatically get a ballot, and that will be due by August 15th. And there are 3 Republicans on that ticket, and then we'll be narrowed down to 1, and then that will go to the general election on November 7th.
All right, thank you so much for being on my show. I really appreciate everything you do, and best of luck in your run for Congress.
All right, thank you.